One of the things that makes people a bit confused when we go into more details is in this part, with the super key, candidate key, and primary key. So now that all of you are slowly becoming database designers, okay, one of the things that you want to do is once you store the student data, you want to be able to access it, correct? You want to be able to access it, all right? It can happen, okay, well, let's say we store student details and we only store the student name and the student address, right? The student name and the student address. We don't store the student number, right? Let's say you don't have a student number. We don't give anyone a student number. And then we store your details, your name and your address into the database. Then we want to find a certain student. What is the chance that we have got two students with the same name? The chance is very high. You won't believe it. I had two students with the same name living at the same house in Canberra. Same name, first name, same last name, living in a house in Canberra. How can it happen? It was no double entry. It was two people that existed with the same first name, with the same last name. Do you have one in your house? There we go.
Not in the house. My mate and there's another guy who committed crime in New South Wales. But my mate, he has got a ticket for $900, but the other guy committed in New South Wales.
Okay. It's a bad database, probably the police database. So the people that are listening, this gentleman saying he's got a friend that has got the same name as somebody else in New South Wales, and fine for that person in New South Wales landed to your friend's house. But what happens was, in my case, was two people came from China, two students from China came, one from North China, one from South, with the same first name and last name, came to a study in Canberra Uni, and they didn't know each other. They were looking for a house, and they found two rooms in the same house. So two people never knew they have got.
Did it happen with like a father and son as well?
Father and son can happen too if they have got the same name. Yeah. This wasn't even junior or senior. It was just the same first name, the same last name, living in the same house. And both were our students in the same subject. So imagine what will happen now, right? Both sit for the exam, and I've got two grades for two students with the same name. Which one do I give the higher grade? Which one I give the lower grade? So that's why in a table or in a relation or in a for each entity, we need to have a unique identifying attribute to be able to uniquely identify every member of that entity, every row of that table. And that's why you have the student number, license number, credit card number, account number, registration number of your car, insurance number, subject number, right? You've got many of them. You carry it in your pocket. You carry it with you. So, because what we do is, we cannot be sure that every single row of our table will have different data for different, attached to different item, object, or something. They could be all the same, but representing two different items. So what we do is, we give each one extra attribute. And the extra attribute is the uniquely identifying attribute. So fortunately, in this university, we have got good database designers, so we have a student number. So the two persons that lived in the same house with the same first and last name could be distinguished, because what we ask you, say, what is your student number? I never ask anyone, what's your first name and last name? So some people say, this guy is very rude, doesn't even ask my name, just ask for the student number. The reason I'm asking, I want to be able to identify all your data uniquely, right? So that's why when you go to the exam, we ask you to write your student number so we can uniquely identify you. So if there are now 10 people with the same name, I know I can identify them uniquely. We store data in the databases. What we do is we basically create entities, and entities are the name for an object, an item, or something. When I say something, you could be storing details about trees, birds, cars. In your, if you're having a car yard, you store details of what your vehicles. So if you've got a library, your entities are books, library members, etc. So an entity is an object, something that we are interested to store data about for our organization. The entity is the same as a table, and it has got attributes, the name of the columns. And one more thing that you learned was that we should be able to uniquely identify every member or every row of each table. So to do that, there are several ways of doing it. One way is just we go and say, okay, what we do is we add one extra attribute to every entity, and that would be a student name, for example, tree name, vehicle number, book number, or catalog number, right? Or we may try to use a combination of attribute values together to uniquely identify a row in our table. So, for example, you may just say, I don't need to give everyone another attribute. I don't need student number or customer number. What I do is I just use their telephone number. So each one of you have got a unique telephone number, correct? Yeah? That's correct. So if you all have a telephone, then it works. But if you don't have a telephone number, then you will have problem in your database. But let's say what you do is you say the telephone number of each person is unique. Therefore, each person that is, for example, customer of my company should have a telephone number or an email address. Email addresses are unique. And I use that to identify my customer. So when a customer comes and says, what's your telephone number? And you enter it in, and you get the details of that customer coming up from the table customer. Or you ask for the email address. Does this make sense? So it is possible to do that. But if a person changes their telephone number, you have a bit of trouble. A little bit of trouble, because you have to just update, get the new telephone number, put it there, and then everything is okay. The problem is this. In many countries, for example, like Hong Kong, after a few years, the telephone numbers that are returned, you have got a telephone number with the company, then you cancel. After 2-3 years, this number is issued to somebody else. So if you get a phone in Hong Kong, you get lots of phone calls. People calling you, say, hey. That's why you say hello in Hong Kong. Hey. And they start talking to you Cantonese and say, sorry, wrong number. So you get it 2-3 times a day because the same number now reactivated. This is where the problem is of using this existing attributes in a table to uniquely identify each row in a table. So when we talk about super keys, is an attribute or set of attributes that can uniquely identify every row of data in your table. So you could say for a student name and a student address. In my case, it didn't work because I had the same student with the same name living in the same address. I had two the same. So, well, that's what's called a super key. Super key is a set of attributes that you may choose to represent each of the rows in your table, right? So you could use a uniquely identifying attribute, like a student number, customer number, registration number, vehicle number, catalog number, or you can use a combination of attributes. So when you try to use combination of attributes, there could be several combination of attributes that you may be available to you. So from a table consisting of set of attributes, you can choose combination of several attributes to represent each row of the table uniquely. That's called the super key. So don't get confused. Super key is attribute or set of attributes of existing attributes of an entity that you may choose to uniquely identify each row in the table. So if you have got several super keys, right? Okay, so you have got several candidates of possibilities of different combinations of attributes to represent each row uniquely. So super key is a set of attributes when you've got several of those super keys, you've got the candidates now. You've got several candidates. That's what we call candidate keys. All the possible attributes combinations that you can think of that can represent each row uniquely. Does this make sense? So super key is a set, and then you could have several candidates. From these several candidates of attributes, it could be just say telephone number, or I choose the address and the telephone number, address and telephone number and the name, address and telephone number and the email address. Could be several combinations. There's several of them available. You should choose one. The one that you choose is called the primary key. So a primary key is an attribute or set of attributes that uniquely identify each row in your table. For you that you're starting now in the database design, I would recommend to you, at least for your first design, to create an extra attribute for each of your table that uniquely represents each row. So you create your own primary key. So for example, if you type table student, you create a student number. Table customer, customer number. Table book, book number. Table CD, that contains all the CD information, CD number. DVD number, right? So, and then as you become more familiar with these terminologies, you may be able to use combinations of attributes, of existing attributes, to create a primary key. But remember, when you create your own attribute, you can be 100% sure, if you give each student unique student ID, that you can uniquely identify them. But if you choose student number, name, and telephone number, right, you may not be so successful. In my case, the same student with the same name lived in the same house with the same telephone number. So it was just my lucky time, with those students being around. The one that you choose to represent each row uniquely is called the primary key, the one attribute or set of attributes, or the one attribute that you create. And any other attribute that are not selected to be primary keys are the alternate keys. Now that we talked about entities, and entities are tables consisting of rows and the columns are attributes, rows contains the data. So we have got lots of entities. We set a relational model, relational database, and we not only store the entities, we also store the relationship between the entities. And how do we store relationships? The relationships are stored using foreign keys. And a foreign key is a primary key of an attribute that is stored in another attribute. If I may go back to our example of branch and the staff, now you can see what's happening. Look at table branch number, street, city, postcode, the staff, a staff number, first name, last name, position, sex, date of birth, salary, and branch number. All right. So if you look at the table branch, the branch number is the primary key. Right, I tell you it is. In the table staff, set the staff number to be the primary key. So if you give me any staff number or branch number, I can give you the details of that branch or the staff. Yeah? So now we want to also store the relationship of which staff works in which branch. And I said to you, when you want to store relationship between two entities, you have to store the primary key of one of the entities in another entity. So you have to create a foreign key. You have to create a foreign key. And the foreign key is a primary key of one entity that's stored in another entity. So in this case, I put the branch number of the branch with the table staff. Now I have established the relationship of which staff works in which branch. Remember here, we're just assuming each staff works in one branch. And that's why it's possible this way. Right? You could say, why didn't you put the staff number with the table branch? The reason is that many staff work in the same branch. So if I put another column with next to the branch and put the staff number here, so that I can do the relationship in this way, so I would have several values in a staff number for each branch. So each row, each cell in your table should contain one data item value. So that's why I have moved, and this is a bit confusing, right, for you, but you will learn it very quickly within the next few weeks. So relationships are established through foreign keys, and foreign key is a primary key of an attribute, an entity that's stored with another entity. So what we have here, we have the table branch, entity branch with 4 attributes. One of them is a primary key, branch number. The entity staff with 8 attributes. Staff number is the primary key. Branch number is a foreign key. Why is it a foreign key? Because it's a primary key in a table branch.